Ethan Caldwell pressed the letter against the fireplace grate and held it there until the paper caught, and he did not let go until the last corner turned to ash and floated up into the dark. 3 years. 3 years since he had looked at a woman's face and felt anything other than the specific exhaustion of a man who has already lost the thing he was most afraid of losing. He had made his peace with that, or so he believed. Until the afternoon, he stood at the edge of the Ashford lawn, said 4 words to his estate manager, and cracked open everything he had spent 3 years sealing shut. Bring me her name. If this story already has its hand around your heart, subscribe to this channel right now. Drop the name of your city in the comments below, and let me see just how far one story can travel. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The morning Ethan rode to the Ashford gathering, he told himself it was business. He told himself that every time Gerald Holt appeared in the doorway of his study, with that particular expression, the one that meant "Sir," the world outside this estate still exists, and it requires your participation, and every time Ethan had the same response. He reached for his coat. He said nothing. He rode. It was easier than the alternative, which was admitting that 9 years of running Caldwell Estate had taught him one thing above all others. You could survive anything as long as you kept moving. Stop long enough to feel it, and it would take you down at the knees. So he moved. He arrived at the Ashford South lawn at 2:30, positioned himself at the outer edge where the shade of the elm trees gave him a reason to stand apart, and spent the first 40 minutes doing what he always did at these things, being present enough to satisfy obligation and invisible enough to avoid conversation. Commissioner Hale got 3 minutes of his attention and a firm handshake. Reverend Marsh got 2 minutes and a nod about the drought. Everyone else got nothing, which was what they expected from Ethan Caldwell, and what he had learned to deliver with such consistency that people had stopped being offended by it and had simply begun to treat his coldness as a fixed feature of the landscape, like the stone wall at the north end of the Caldwell property, or the particular way the weather always turned hard in November. He was watching the Whitmore children chase each other across the far end of the lawn when Gerald materialized at his elbow. Commissioner Hale seemed pleased, sir. Good. The grain agreement should hold through September without difficulty. Then we can leave. Gerald hesitated. Perhaps another 30 minutes, sir. To be 20. Yes, sir. Ethan turned his attention back to the lawn. He was already thinking about the accounts he had left open on the study desk, the Eastern field inspection he had postponed, twice the letter from the Boston merchant that required a response before Friday. And then he saw her. She was standing at the far end of the refreshment table, not sitting, not circulating, not performing the elaborate social theater that everyone else on the lawn was engaged in. She was standing with a book open in her hands, reading with the uncomplicated focus of a woman who had made a decision about how to spend the next hour, and intended to honor it regardless of what anyone thought. At a county charity gathering, in full daylight, reading. Ethan stopped thinking about the accounts. Her dress was pale blue cotton, clean and pressed, but it was not new. He could see that from where he stood, the kind of detail that most men missed, and that Ethan, who had spent 3 years learning to notice everything around him, because noticing was easier than feeling caught immediately. The sleeves had been let out at the seams. Her hair was pinned practically not fashionably. She wore no jewelry except a small pin at her collar. She looked like a woman who had decided at some point that she did not need to be anything other than exactly what she was. He found that unusual. He found that, and this was the part that unsettled him, interesting. Then the Whitmore boy hit the refreshment table at a dead run. The tray stand tilted hard. Glasses shifted. Someone nearby drew a sharp breath. The woman's left hand shot out without her eyes leaving the page. She caught the edge of the tray, steadied it, set it flat, turned the page with her right hand. She did not look up. She did not check to see if anyone had seen. She simply turned the page and kept reading as though the reflexes of a person who notices everything had acted entirely without her permission, and she was not interested in taking credit for it. Ethan stared at her. Then he turned to Gerald. "The woman at the refreshment table," he said. "The one reading. Yes, sir. Bring me her name. Gerald looked at him with the expression of a man who has worked for someone for 9 years and has learned to recognize the specific quality of attention his employer was currently displaying. Careful, precise, and entirely unlike anything Gerald had seen from him in 3 years. Right away, sir, Gerald said carefully. Her name was Evelyn Hart. Gerald delivered this with the thoroughness of a man who understood that bring me her name had never in 9 years of employment meant only the name. Evelyn Hart, 28, second daughter of the late Edmund Hart of Boston. A family that had held a respectable position in Massachusetts society for 2 generations, before a series of bad investments and an early death, had stripped away the money and left only the name, which was worth considerably less than it had once been. No suitors of note. No prospects in the traditional sense. She had spent 3 years in Concord, cataloging the private library of a retired judge, and since the judge's death in March, she had been staying with a cousin in Ashford County while she looked for a new position. Between positions, Ethan said. Yes, sir. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the study window, the evening was coming down slow and gold over the eastern fields, the kind of summer evening that looked like something out of a painting, and felt to Ethan like evidence that the world had no particular concern for the interior states of the people living in it. The Caldwell Library, he said. How long has it been since anyone catalogued it? 4 years, sir. Since before, Gerald stopped. Since before, Ethan agreed. 14,000 volumes, no system, no index. He turned from the window. Write to her cousin's address. Offer the position. Room and board at the estate. Standard cataloging terms. Fair wage. Gerald paused a careful pause, the kind that contained a question he was deciding whether to ask. And the letter, sir. Shall I word it as an invitation or... It is not an invitation, Ethan said flatly. It is an offer of employment. Word it accordingly. Yes, sir. And Gerald, sir. Do not make it sound like a summons either. He picked up the merchant's letter from the desk. Make it sound like an opportunity. Because it is. Gerald nodded once and left. Ethan stood at the desk for a long moment after the door closed. He told himself it was practical. The library needed cataloging. She needed a position. The logic was clean and straightforward and had nothing whatsoever to do with the way she had caught that tray without looking up from her book. He told himself that. He almost believed it. Evelyn Hart arrived on a Thursday with a single trunk, a leather satchel worn soft at the handles, and the calm, assessing expression of a woman who has learned to read a situation before she responds to it. She stood in the front drive and looked at Caldwell Hall for a long moment without speaking. Mrs. Aldridge, who had come out to meet her, said, "The east wing has the better light." "Is that where the library is?" "Yes, miss." "Then that's where I'll be most of the time." Evelyn picked up her satchel. "Shall we?" Mrs. Aldridge, who had spent 20 years developing an instinct for people, thought she'll do. The library stopped Evelyn cold. She stepped through the door, took one look at 14,000 volumes, arranged in no discernible system, across 17 floor-to-ceiling shelves, and felt a surge of something she had not felt since before her father died. The specific bright pleasure of a problem that is exactly the right size. She walked to the nearest shelf and pulled a volume at random. A French natural history text, 1793, hand-painted illustrations, binding cracked at the spine, but pages intact. She turned to the title page with the reverence of someone holding something that had outlived most of the people who had ever touched it. "You are Miss Hart." She turned. Ethan Caldwell stood in the doorway. She had not heard him. That was the first thing she noticed, not because she was unobservant, but because most men of property move through their own homes with the audible self-assurance of ownership. And this one moved like he had no interest in announcing himself. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and his expression entirely neutral, and he was looking at her the way she looked at an unfamiliar text, carefully, without assumption, gathering data. "I am," she said. "Eastern shelves first. Mrs. Aldridge will provide whatever materials you need." His eyes moved briefly to the book in her hands. "That belongs in natural sciences." "There is no natural sciences section." "Not yet." I'll need to assess the full collection before I decide on a classification system, she said. Subject matter acquisition date language of origin. The right structure depends on what the collection is actually being used for. Do you use it? A pause. I did, he said. Once. Something in the way he said it closed the subject like a door shutting. She did not push. I'll start with an inventory, she said. It will take time. Take what you need. He turned to leave. Mr. Caldwell. He stopped. Did not turn fully, just enough to indicate he was listening. Whoever built this collection, she said, they weren't trying to impress anyone. These books were bought because someone genuinely wanted to read them. She looked at the shelves. That's rarer than most people think. A silence. Then, my father. He had excellent taste. He had too much of it, Ethan said quietly. In everything. He left. Evelyn stood in the library for a moment, listening to his footsteps fade down the corridor, measured even the walk of a man who has trained himself not to rush. Careful, she thought. Not cold. Careful. There was a significant difference, and she suspected very few people in Ethan Caldwell's life had bothered to notice it. The first week passed mostly in silence. He appeared twice Wednesday morning, standing inside the door for less than a minute. Friday late afternoon, standing at the window with his back to her, doing nothing she could name. Both times he left without speaking, and both times Evelyn continued working without comment, because she understood instinctively that these appearances were not interruptions. They were something else entirely. A man checking on something that mattered to him without wanting to admit it mattered. On Saturday morning, she arrived to find a second reading lamp on the table. She had not requested one. She looked at it for a moment, then lit it and said nothing. In the second week, she found the pattern in the disorder. The books weren't random, they were personal. Whatever system had once existed had been abandoned, but the acquisition itself had been deliberate. She could see it in the progression years of careful purchase, then a sudden gap, then nothing. A collection that had simply stopped in the middle of a thought, the way a conversation stops when someone leaves the room. She was deep in the north wall shelves on a Wednesday afternoon, cross-referencing 2 volumes she suspected were companion texts when she heard him come in behind her. The gap in the collection, she said without turning. The acquisitions stop around 1810. Was that when your father died? A pause. 1811. I'm sorry. Were you close to your father? She pulled out a third volume, examined the spine. Very. He died 4 years ago. She turned then. It changes you losing a parent. The grief doesn't go away, it just changes shape. Ethan looked at her steadily. You speak about loss as though you've made a study of it, he said. I suppose I have. She set the 3 volumes on the reading table. It seemed more useful than pretending it hadn't happened. Something shifted in his face, a fraction barely visible. He crossed to the table and looked at the 3 volumes she had laid out. What are these? Companion texts. Someone bought them together, then filed them in 3 different sections. Look. She opened each one to its title page and laid them side by side. Same printer, same year, different subjects. But look at the margin annotations. Same hand in all 3. Your father read them as a set. Ethan stared at the open pages. He reached out and touched the margin of the center volume. Not the text, just the edge of the page where his father's handwriting ran in small, precise notes along the border. He pulled his hand back after a moment. File them together. He said, his voice slightly rougher than before. Whatever section fits. Yes, sir. He left quickly that time, more quickly than usual. Evelyn watched the door for a beat. There he is, she thought quietly. There's the man underneath, a pijad. It was the 3rd week when she found the locked case. Tucked behind a row of Blackstone legal volumes on the 4th shelf of the north wall, a wooden case roughly the size of a hatbox, with a French lock mechanism from the 1790s and a keyhole that had been sealed with wax at some point, and then cleaned again somewhat clumsily by someone who had changed their mind about sealing it. She carried it to the reading table and set it down. She did not try to open it. She was still examining it 20 minutes later when Ethan came in. He stopped when he saw it on the table. "Where did you find that?" he said. Not a question. "Behind the Blackstone volumes." She looked at him directly. "The wax was removed recently. Someone cleaned the keyhole within the last few months." She paused. "This wasn't forgotten, Mr. Caldwell. It was put here deliberately." And then someone had second thoughts. The silence that followed was a different quality than his usual silences. Heavier, the kind that precedes something. "It's not hidden," he said. "It's stored. Behind 14 volumes of English legal commentary in a library no one has entered in 4 years. She met his eyes without flinching. "That's not storage. That's avoidance." His jaw tightened. He reached into his coat pocket. He set a small key on the table between them. "Open it," he said. "You've had the key this whole time." "Yes." "Then why?" "Because I couldn't decide," he said, and his voice was completely flat, the way a man's voice goes flat when he is controlling something large. "Whether what's inside should be preserved or burned. And I have been standing on that fence for 4 months and getting nowhere." He looked at her. "Open it." She picked up the key. Inside letters. 40, perhaps 50, tied with silk ribbon faded to the color of old cream. The handwriting on the topmost envelope was a woman's hurried, precise, the hand of someone with more to say than time to say it. Evelyn did not read them. She looked up at him. "These are personal," she said. "Yes." "Do you want me to catalog them, or—" "They're from my fiancée," he said. "The woman I was engaged to." She waited. "She didn't die," he said then. And something in the way he said it made clear that he had said this sentence before, many times in the privacy of his own mind, trying to get it to sit flat. "That's the wrong word, and I keep using it anyway." She left. She chose another man, and she left, and I had already buried her in my head by the time the letter arrived 8 months later, telling me she was dead. Carriage accident outside Providence. He stopped. I've never been entirely certain which loss I was grieving. The room was very quiet. "Both," Evelyn said. "You were grieving both. The woman who left and the one who died. They weren't the same person anymore by the time she was gone, and you lost both of them." He stared at her. "You can't know that," he said. "No," she said. "But it's true anyway. You know it is." A long silence. "Catalog them as personal correspondence," he said finally. "Separate from the general collection. No one reads them." "Including me." "Including you. Understood." She began carefully retying the ribbon. "Mr. Caldwell, whoever kept these letters, whoever couldn't decide between preserving them and burning them, that's not a cold man." She looked up. "That's a man who feels too much and has no idea what to do with it." The silence that followed was the longest yet. Then he said very quietly, "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Understand me." His voice was tight. "I did not hire you to understand me. I hired you to catalog the library." "I know," she said simply. "But you left the key in your pocket for 4 months instead of burning those letters. So I think on some level you wanted someone to notice." He held her gaze for a moment, the longest he had ever held it. Then he turned and walked out. But the next morning, there was a fire already laid in the library grate when she arrived, though the July air was warm enough that no one needed it. And she understood that for a man who could not say anything directly, this was practically a confession. The 4th week brought Fabian Mercer. He arrived on a Wednesday with a letter of introduction from Commissioner Hale and the practiced ease of a man who has been welcomed everywhere so long that he has forgotten it's not guaranteed. He was perhaps 30, dressed with studied casualness, handsome in the way that requires maintenance. He shook Ethan's hand with the warm confidence of a man who assumes he is liked. When he saw Evelyn in the entry hall, he smiled. "Miss Hart, I've heard remarkable things about your work." He crossed to her without waiting for an introduction, took her hand before she offered it. A woman cataloging rare texts extraordinary. Tell me, how does a woman of your... He paused. The pause of a man selecting a word designed to flatter refinement end up buried in someone else's library. Quite happily, Evelyn said pleasantly. Fabian laughed. Charming, truly. He glanced at Ethan. You found quite a treasure, Caldwell. Ethan said nothing. He was looking at Fabian's hand, which was still holding Evelyn's. Fabian released it a beat later, just a beat too late. I wonder, Fabian said to Evelyn, if you might be attending the Hale dinner next month. Commissioner Hale's gatherings are exceptional. I'd be glad to. Miss Hart is employed, Ethan said. His voice was quiet and absolute. Not social. A short silence. Fabian turned to him with a smooth smile. Of course. I only meant, she will not be attending. Ethan turned toward the corridor. Gerald will show you to the parlor. I'll be with you in 10 minutes. He walked away without another word. Fabian watched him go, then looked at Evelyn with an expression of theatrical sympathy. He's always been like that, he asked quietly. I wouldn't know, Evelyn said. I've only been here a month, and yet. Fabian studied her with frank curiosity. You don't seem afraid of him. Should I be? Most people are. Most people, she said, picking up her satchel. Mistake quiet for danger. She nodded politely. Good afternoon, Mr. Mercer. She walked back toward the library. Behind her, she heard Fabian let out a slow breath, and she could not tell if it was admiration or the beginning of something less comfortable. He came back Thursday. Mrs. Aldridge said the following Monday with the particular neutrality of a woman who has opinions she has decided to contain. While you were in the East Wing, spent the better part of an hour with Mr. Caldwell. Evelyn did not look up from the catalog. Did he? Asked about you again? A pause. Asked whether you'd be at the county social in August. Now she looked up. What did Mr. Caldwell say? Mrs. Aldridge smoothed her apron. He said you were the most capable cataloger in 3 counties, and he had no intention of losing your working hours to social obligations. She picked up the tea tray. And then he ended the conversation and went back to the accounts. After she left, Evelyn sat with the catalog open in front of her. The most capable cataloger in 3 counties. She thought about what that had cost a man like Ethan Caldwell to say aloud to someone else. She thought about the locked case and the fire in the morning, and the second lamp on the table. He is not cold, she thought again. He is the most careful man I have ever met. And she was beginning to understand in the way that understanding comes quietly, and all at once, that careful men were far more dangerous to the heart than cold ones. Because cold men kept their distance. Careful men got closer than anyone expected. And by the time you noticed, it was already too late. The morning after Fabian Mercer's second visit, Ethan Caldwell did something he had not done in 3 years. He came to the library before she did. Evelyn arrived at 7:30 to find him already there, standing at the reading table, with the catalog she had started her handwritten index. 12 pages of careful notation open in front of him. He was not reading it casually. He was studying it the way a man studies something that has surprised him. He looked up when she came in. Neither of them spoke for a moment. You cross-reference by acquisition year and subject simultaneously, he said finally. It gives 2 points of access instead of 1. She set down her satchel. Most people only need to find a book one way, but occasionally someone needs to find everything purchased in a given decade or everything on a given subject, and a single-axis system fails them. Your father's collection is large enough that a dual index is worth the extra time. He looked back at this catalog. My father would have agreed with you. Did he talk to you about the library? When I was young, he used to bring me in here on Sunday mornings and let me choose one book to read for the week. He said the ability to choose well was more important than any specific knowledge. A pause. I chose poorly most of the time. He never said so. Evelyn pulled out her chair and sat. That sounds like a man who understood the difference between correction and teaching. Ethan closed the catalog carefully and set it back exactly as he had found it. "Fabian Mercer has invited you to the Hale dinner," he said. The shift was so abrupt she looked up. "He mentioned it, yes." "Will you go?" "I wasn't planning to." Something in his posture changed just slightly, just enough. "You don't have to decline on account of the work. The catalog will keep for an evening." "I'm not declining on account of the work." She opened her satchel and took out her pen. "I'm declining because I don't find Mr. Mercer's company particularly interesting." A silence. "Most women do," Ethan said. "I'm aware." She uncapped the pen. "I'm not most women." He stood at the table a moment longer. Then he walked to the window, the same window he always chose, the east-facing one that caught the morning light, and stood there with his hands behind his back. "He's going to keep coming back," he said. "Mr. Mercer. He doesn't take no as an answer. He takes it as a starting point for negotiation." Evelyn looked up from her work. "Are you warning me, Mr. Caldwell?" He did not turn from the window. "I'm telling you what I know about the man." "How do you know him?" "We went to the same school, 20 years ago." He paused. "He was the kind of boy who was always pleasant to your face and thorough in his cruelty behind your back. I have no evidence he's changed." She set down her pen. "Then why did you let him in?" "Because Commissioner Hale sent him, and I need Commissioner Hale's goodwill through September." He turned from the window then, and his face had the expression it always had when he said something true that cost him something. "Sometimes you let the wrong people in because the alternative is worse." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said carefully, "sounds like something you've had to do more than once." He held her gaze one beat too, and then he crossed to the door. "The north wall shelves," he said. "You mentioned yesterday you'd found a gap in the chronology. I'd like to know what's missing." "I'll have a list by afternoon." He nodded once and left. Evelyn sat in the quiet of the library and listened to his footsteps go down the corridor and felt for the first time the specific unease of a woman who has started paying attention to the sound of someone leaving. Fabian Mercer came back on Friday. He did not come to see Ethan. He came to the library. Evelyn heard him before she saw him. His particular walk unhurried and self-assured, the walk of a man who has never felt unwelcome anywhere. She was on the fourth shelf of the north wall when he appeared in the doorway, and she took her time climbing down before she turned around. "Mr. Mercer." "Miss Hart." He smiled. "I hope I'm not interrupting scholarship." "You are," she said pleasantly. "But go ahead." He laughed, a genuine laugh she noticed, which was the most honest thing she had seen from him. He came into the library and looked around with the expression of someone who has entered a place they find mildly baffling. 14,000 books, he said, and you're cataloging them alone. That's the job. Doesn't it get lonely? Books are excellent company." She moved to the reading table and picked up her pen. "Was there something you needed, Mr. Mercer, or did you come to watch me work?" "I came to ask you something." He crossed to the table, not to the other side of it, but beside her, which was closer than necessary. "The Hale dinner, August 15th. Commissioner Hale specifically asked about you. He heard from the Ashford family that you have expertise in colonial American texts, and he has a collection he'd like assessed. It would be professional, not social. You'd be compensated for your time." She looked at him steadily. "Did Commissioner Hale ask, or did you tell him to ask?" A pause. Then another genuine reaction, a slight widening of the eyes quickly controlled. "You're very direct." "I find it saves time." "Caldwell doesn't deserve you," he said, and his voice had shifted quieter, more deliberate. "You know that, don't you? You're spending your days in this man's library while he uses you as an excuse to avoid everyone and everything. You could be doing real work, important work." "I am doing real work. I mean work that's seen." He leaned forward slightly. "I have connections in Boston, Miss Hart. Philadelphia. I know 3 collectors who would pay generously for someone with your expertise. I could make introductions, proper ones." She put down her pen. She turned to face him fully, and she looked at him with the calm, unhurried attention of a woman who has spent 3 years learning to read what people don't say. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I appreciate the offer. I don't need the introductions, and I'd like to finish the north wall before noon, so—" She gestured politely toward the door. His smile stayed in place, but something behind it cooled. "Of course," he said. "Another time." He left. She stood at the reading table for a moment after he was gone, and felt the particular discomfort of a conversation that has multiple floors to it, the one you can see and the ones underneath. She was still thinking about it 20 minutes later when she heard the footstep in the doorway and looked up expecting Mrs. Aldridge. It was Ethan. He had not come at his usual time. He had not come at any usual time. It was barely 10 in the morning, and he was still in his riding coat, which meant he had come directly from somewhere. "He was here," Ethan said. It was not a question. "Yes." What did he want? She considered how to answer that. "He offered to make professional introductions on my behalf. Collectors in Boston and Philadelphia." Ethan was very still. "And—" "I declined." "Why?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I don't take offers from men who frame helpfulness as a prerequisite for something else." A silence. "He said something else," Ethan said. "What was it?" She hesitated, not because she didn't want to tell him, but because she was choosing her words carefully. "He suggested that working here was beneath my capabilities. And that you were using me as an excuse to avoid the world." The silence that followed was longer and of a different quality. Ethan walked to the window. He stood there for a moment, his back to her, his hands very still at his sides. "He's not entirely wrong," he said quietly. "He's mostly wrong," she said. "There's a difference between avoiding the world and choosing which parts of it are worth your time." He turned then. "You're defending me. I'm correcting an inaccurate assessment. Miss Hart." His voice was deliberate, measured the voice he used when he was saying something true that he had not planned to say. "I am a man who has spent 3 years making this estate into something that doesn't require him to feel anything. Mercer knows that. Everyone in this county knows that. The question is whether it bothers you." She held his gaze. "Should it? Most people find it—" He paused, choosing the word off-putting. "Most people," she said, and she could hear her own voice echoing his words from 2 weeks ago, "are looking for something I'm not looking for." He stared at her. And for the first time, Evelyn saw it a fracture in the careful, controlled surface. Not enough to break through. Just enough to let the light show. Then he said, "The gap in the north wall chronology. You said you'd have a list by afternoon. It's on the table." He crossed to it, picked it up, read it with the focused attention he gave everything. His jaw moved slightly as he read a small tell she had started to notice when he was processing something that mattered to him. 11 volumes, he said, all from the same period. 1808 to 1810, the 2 years before your father died. She watched him carefully. Someone removed them. They weren't lost, the shelf marks are still there. Someone took them deliberately. He set the list down. "I did," he said. She waited. "After he died. He stopped, tried again. "There was a period where I found it easier to remove things than to look at them." "Where are they now?" "I don't know." The admission seemed to cost him something. "I put them somewhere and I don't remember where. I was not—" Another stop. "I was not well that year." "We could look for them," she said, "if you wanted." He looked at her, and there it was again, that fracture wider this time. "Why would you do that?" he said quietly. "Because they belong in the collection," she said. "And because your father chose them. And because—" She paused, allowing herself one honest thing. "I think you want them back, and you haven't been able to ask anyone to help you find them." The silence lasted a long time. "Tomorrow morning," he said finally, "if you're willing. I'll be here at 7. He picked up his riding gloves from where he'd set them on the corner of the table. "Miss Hart," he said at the door. "Yes." Mercer will not stop at introductions. She looked at him. I know. If he gives you trouble, I'm capable of managing difficult men, Mr. Caldwell. I know you are. A pause. I'm saying if he gives you trouble, I want to know. She nodded once. He left. She stood in the library and allowed herself just for a moment the full weight of what had just been said. Not the words, but the thing underneath the words. The thing a man says when he has started without meaning to, without planning to care what happens to someone. She pressed her hands flat on the reading table and breathed. Careful, she reminded herself. You came here to catalog a library. That is all. That is enough. But she was already starting to suspect it was not going to be enough. They found the first book the next morning. It was in the storage room at the end of the east corridor, a small room that Ethan had clearly not entered in some time because the door required 2 attempts to open, and Mrs. Aldridge had to be located to find the correct key. Inside were crates from his father's time still unpacked, still sealed with rope. Ethan stood at the entrance to the room and did not go in immediately. Evelyn went in first. She moved the crates aside methodically, reading the labels in the dim light, until she found the one marked Library Misc in handwriting that was not Ethan's. She cut the rope with the small penknife she kept in her satchel and opened the crate. Inside, 11 volumes wrapped individually in cloth. She looked back at the doorway. Ethan was standing at the threshold watching her. They're here, she said. All 11. He came in then and crouched beside the crate and picked up the first wrapped volume. He unwrapped it with the careful, deliberate movements of a man handling something he is not sure he is ready for. It was a volume of correspondence letters between 2 naturalists, published privately annotated throughout in his father's hand. He stared at it for a long moment. He used to read to me from this one, he said, and his voice was different than it had ever been, lower, rougher at the edges. Friday evenings, he had a particular passage he liked, about the way birds navigate by stars. Evelyn said nothing. Sometimes the right response was to hold the space and let a person fill it. I forgot I'd put them away, he said. I forgot I'd done any of it. He looked up. That year after he died, there are months I don't fully remember. I was running the estate and managing the accounts and doing everything that was required of me, and I was... He stopped. I was not present for any of it. Grief does that, she said quietly. It's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. It's an explanation. Those aren't the same thing. He looked at her with that expression. The one she was beginning to understand was the closest he came to the look of a man who has spent so long being careful that genuine surprise registers as something close to pain. You do that constantly, he said. Do what? Say the thing that is precisely accurate. He set the book down. It's... He paused. Unsettling. I'll try to be less precise, she offered. Don't. The word came out quickly, and he seemed to hear it, heard how it sounded, and looked away. They carried the crate back to the library together without speaking, and spent the next hour restoring the 11 volumes to their proper places in the north wall. Ethan knew where each one went without looking at the catalog he remembered once the books were in his hands, the way you remember the layout of a room you grew up in. She watched him work, and understood that this was not a man who had stopped caring about things. This was a man who had cared so deeply and been so thoroughly broken by it that he had had to put everything behind walls just to keep functioning. And the walls were still there. They were just thinner than they had been a month ago. The letter arrived on a Thursday in the 5th week, and it did not come to Evelyn. It came to Ethan. She did not know about it until later, much later, but she felt the change immediately, the way you feel a shift in temperature before you understand its source. He did not come to the library that Thursday, or Friday. On Saturday morning, she arrived to find the second lamp had been moved back to the supply shelf. The fire in the grate was not laid. And when Mrs. Aldridge brought the morning tea, her face had the closed, careful expression of a woman carrying information she had been instructed not to share. "Is Mr. Caldwell well?" Evelyn asked. "He's occupied," Mrs. Aldridge said, "with correspondence." "Has something happened?" I couldn't say, miss. She left. Evelyn sat at the reading table and felt the absence of the lamp with a precision that surprised her. 3 weeks ago, she had not known this library existed. 3 weeks ago, she would not have noticed whether a lamp was on the table or on the shelf. She noticed now. She worked through the morning and into the afternoon, and at 3:30, Ethan came in. She knew immediately. Something was different in his posture. Not the usual careful control, but something stiffer, more deliberate, the way a man holds himself when he is bracing against something from the inside. His face was the most neutral she had ever seen it, which meant she had learned that something was very wrong. "Miss Hart," he said. "Mr. Caldwell." He walked to the reading table and stood on the opposite side of it, a distance he had not kept in weeks. "I need to ask you something directly," he said, "and I need you to answer me directly." She set down her pen. "All right. Are you acquainted with the Mercer family beyond Fabian Mercer himself?" She looked at him carefully. "No. I met Fabian Mercer for the first time 3 weeks ago here. I had never heard the name before I came to Caldwell Estate." "Are you acquainted with the Ashford family?" "Only through my cousin, who has a passing connection to them through church." "Why?" He looked at her and she saw it then, the thing underneath the neutral face. Not anger. Something worse than anger. Doubt. "A letter was delivered to me Thursday morning," he said. "Anonymously. It contained certain allegations." He paused. "About your reasons for taking this position." She went very still. "What kind of allegations?" she said quietly. "That you were sent here." His voice was careful and flat the way it went when he was holding something at arm's length. "By people with an interest in the Caldwell estate. That the cataloging position was a pretext." The room was absolutely quiet. "That is not true," she said. "I know what the letter says." "I'm telling you what is true." He looked at her, and she saw him do the thing she had watched him do with every difficult thing since she had been here. He pulled back. He went behind the walls. His face went carefully, completely blank. "I'm conducting an inquiry," he said. "While that is ongoing, I think it's best if I what?" She stood up. "If I stop working. If I wait in my room while you decide whether to believe an anonymous letter over 6 weeks of—" She stopped, took a breath, made herself level. "Mr. Caldwell, look at me." He looked at her. "I came here because I needed work, and the position was offered. That is the whole of it." She held his gaze without flinching. "If you cannot take my word against an unsigned piece of paper, then we have a problem that has nothing to do with me." His jaw tightened. "I am not accusing you," he said. "You're not defending me either." A silence. "I need to be certain," he said. "You understand that. After—" He stopped. "You know enough about my history to understand why I need to be certain before you trust someone," she said. "Yes, I understand that." Her voice was quiet and even. "But there is a difference between caution and accusation, Mr. Caldwell. And right now, standing across this table from me with that letter in your head, you are not being cautious. You are doing the same thing that letter wants you to do." He said nothing. She picked up her satchel. "I'll be in my room," she said. "When you've finished your inquiry, if you decide the work should continue, I'll be here." She walked to the door. "Miss Hart?" She stopped. Did not turn fully. "I am not a man who trusts easily," he said. "I want you to know whatever the inquiry finds that has nothing to do with you specifically." She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "That's what makes it hard." She walked out, down the east corridor, through the main hall, up the stairs to her room, where she sat on the edge of the bed in the afternoon light and pressed her hands together and felt for the first time since she had arrived at Caldwell Estate the specific cold of a door closing. She had known somewhere in the part of herself that assessed things clearly and without sentiment that something like this would come. Men like Ethan Caldwell did not simply open. They opened an inch and then they closed again, and then they opened 2 inches and then they closed again. And you could either stand at the door and wait, or you could walk away. And both choices required a kind of courage she was not entirely sure she had. She sat in the afternoon light. She did not pack her trunk, but she did not unpack her satchel either. And downstairs in the library, the fire grate stayed cold. She did not sleep well that night, not because she was afraid, and not because she was angry, though she was both of those things in small controlled measures, but because she kept returning to the look on Ethan Caldwell's face when he had stood across the reading table from her. Not the blank, careful mask he wore for the world. The thing underneath it. The thing she had only seen for a second before he pulled it back behind the walls. It was not suspicion. It was grief. Preemptive grief. The grief of a man who has already decided how a thing is going to end and is bracing for the impact before the blow lands. That was what kept her awake. Not the accusation, the recognition. She had seen that look before on her father's face in the last year before he died, when he would look at the account books and already know what they were going to say before he opened them. The look of a man who has been disappointed so many times that he has learned to absorb the next blow before it arrives, because at least that way it is his choice. Ethan Caldwell was absorbing her before she had even left. She got up before dawn, dressed, and went to the library. The fire grate was still cold. She laid it herself. He found her there at 6:30 on her knees at the grate, coaxing the first flame from the kindling with the focused patience she brought to everything. She heard him stop in the doorway and did not look up. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I'm aware." She sat back on her heels as the fire caught. "But the mornings are cold now, and the work goes better with heat." A silence. "You stayed," he said. "I told you I would be here." She stood and brushed her hands clean. "I meant it." He came into the room slowly, the way he moved when he was uncertain, which was different from his usual deliberate stride. He stopped at the reading table and put both hands flat on the surface and looked at her. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "You do." He blinked slightly, just slightly. She suspected most people let him off more easily. "I made an assumption I had no right to make," he said. "The letter I should have come to you first, before anything else." His jaw worked. "I didn't. And I'm aware of why I didn't, and I'm aware that the reason is not your fault." "What did the letter say?" she asked. "Specifically." "That you were connected to the Whitfield family. That they had placed you here to gain access to the Caldwell estate records, specifically the land deed records in the library archive." She stared at him. "The Whitfields. You know the name?" "They're in a land dispute with 3 families in this county. It's been in the papers." She crossed her arms. "Mr. Caldwell, I have never met a Whitfield in my life. I know that now." He straightened. "Gerald spoke to your cousin yesterday, and I had the letter examine the paper stock, the ink. It was written recently, but it was written to look older. Someone wanted it to appear as though the information had been gathered over time." He paused. "It was fabricated. By whom?" He was quiet for a moment. "I have a strong suspicion," he said. She looked at him. "Mercer." He said nothing, which was its own answer. She uncrossed her arms and turned to the shelves. She needed a moment, not because she was losing composure, but because she wanted to choose her next words with precision. "You believed it," she said to the shelf in front of her. "For 2 days you believed it." Yes. Even after 6 weeks." "Yes." She turned back. "I want you to understand something, Mr. Caldwell. I'm not angry that you had doubts. Doubt is reasonable." "What I'm angry about?" She kept her voice level because she was not a woman who raised her voice, but she let the weight of what she was saying sit fully in the air between them. "Is that you went cold before you asked me. You made the decision to distance yourself before you had any evidence that I had done anything wrong. You did to me exactly what was done to you." The silence that followed was the longest yet. His face did something complicated, several things in quick succession, too fast for her to track all of them. Then it went very still. You're right, he said quietly. I did. I know why you did it. That doesn't make it less true. No, he said. It doesn't. She held his gaze. So here is what I need from you, Mr. Caldwell. Not a promise that you'll never doubt me again. That's not a promise any honest person can make. What I need is a commitment that the next time, because there will be a next time with someone like Mercer involved, you come to me first. Before the walls go up, before the distance. You ask me, and you let me answer, and you listen. He looked at her for a long moment. That, he said carefully, is harder than it sounds. I know, she said. I'm asking anyway. Another silence, and then something happened that she had not expected. He let out a slow breath, and with it something in his posture changed. Not collapsed. Ethan Caldwell did not collapse, but released. The way a man releases a breath he has been holding for longer than he realized. All right, he said. All right. I'll ask first. He met her eyes. I give you my word. She nodded once. Then let's get back to work. Guy. She found out what Mercer had done 3 days later, and not from Ethan. She found out from Mrs. Aldridge, who heard it from the Ashford family's housekeeper, who had heard it from 2 sources simultaneously, which meant it was already moving through the county like water through dry ground. Fabian Mercer had been talking, not about the letter. He was too careful for that. He had been talking at dinner parties, at the commissioner's luncheon, at the kind of social gatherings where information passes as entertainment, and no one examines where it came from too closely. He had been saying in the pleasant, half-concerned voice of a man who hates gossip, but feels duty-bound to share what he knows, that Ethan Caldwell had hired a woman of questionable background for an unsupervised position in his private residence. That the arrangement was at minimum unusual. That he himself had visited and found the situation somewhat, he would pause there and let the pause do the work irregular. He had not said anything that could be directly refuted. He had not needed to. The implication was enough. Evelyn heard all of this from Mrs. Aldridge on a Tuesday morning, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, and she was quiet for a long moment after. "Does Mr. Caldwell know?" she asked. "Gerald told him yesterday evening." Mrs. Aldridge sat down across from her. He was in the study for 2 hours after, alone. Evelyn set down the cup. "What does this mean for the position?" "That," Mrs. Aldridge said, with the directness of a woman who had earned the right to it, "depends entirely on Mr. Caldwell. And on you." She looked at her steadily. "Are you thinking of leaving?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "No," she said finally. "But I'm thinking about what it means to stay. It means you've decided the work is worth more than the gossip." Mrs. Aldridge stood. "That's what it's always meant for anyone who stayed in this house." Ethan came to the library that afternoon with his jaw set, and his eyes carrying the particular quality she had learned to recognize as controlled fury. Not hot, not impulsive, but cold and thorough. The anger of a man who is deciding what to do with a problem rather than reacting to it. "You've heard," he said. "This morning." He crossed to the window, stood there. He's been deliberate about it, specific enough to make an impression, vague enough to avoid accountability. He turned. "I want you to know whatever you decide." "I'm not leaving," she said. He stopped. "I'm not leaving," she said again more quietly. "Not because of Fabian Mercer's gossip. If I ran from every man who used his position to damage a woman's reputation, I'd have been running my entire life." She looked at him directly. "But I do need to understand what you intend to do about it." "I intend to deal with Mercer." "How?" "Through the appropriate channels. Gerald is already compiling what we know about the letter, the paper, the timing, the fact that Mercer was the last person to visit before it arrived. Commissioner Hale is not a foolish man. When I present this to him, that will take time," she said, "and while it's happening, the gossip continues. I know that. People will say things about this household, about me, about you." She paused. about what they think is happening between us. He was very still. "Nothing is happening between us," he said, and his voice was careful in the specific way it got when he was saying something he was not entirely sure was true. "I know that," she said. "You know that. Fabian Mercer knows that." A pause. "But that is not what he is telling people." A silence stretched between them, taut, careful, full of things neither of them was addressing directly. "What would you have me do?" he said finally. "I'm not asking you to do anything," she said. "I'm asking what you intend to do. There's a difference. I want to know if you're going to stand behind the position you offered me, or if the pressure of what people are saying is going to make you—" She chose the word deliberately, reconsider. He looked at her with an expression that was for him remarkably unguarded. "I don't reconsider things because other people talk," he said flatly. "I never have." "Good." She picked up her pen. "Then neither will I." He stood at the window a moment longer, then, "There is something else." She looked up. "Mercer has been invited to the Hale dinner as a guest of honor. Commissioner Hale doesn't know yet what I suspect about him. The dinner is in 10 days. He paused. "I think you should attend." She stared at him. "You told him I wasn't social." "I know what I told him." He crossed his arms. "And I meant it at the time. But allowing Mercer to appear at Commissioner Hale's table unchallenged while you remain here gives the impression that you're hiding. Or that I am." He met her eyes. "You are the most capable person in this county when it comes to historical texts. Hale has a collection. You have credentials. Your attendance would be professional." "That's almost exactly what Mercer said when he tried to get me to go." "I'm aware of the similarity," Ethan said, and his voice had a dry edge she had not heard from him before. "The difference is my motive, which is—" a pause. "I don't want him to win." She looked at him for a long moment. "Neither do I," she said. The Hale dinner was on a Friday evening, and Evelyn wore her second-best dress, which was better than her best in terms of dignity, if not in terms of fashion. And she arrived in the Caldwell carriage with Mrs. Aldridge as chaperone, and Ethan riding alongside on horseback, which was not technically escort in the formal sense. But was she understood as close to formal escort as Ethan Caldwell had offered anyone in 3 years? She did not comment on it. She walked into Commissioner Hale's dining room with her chin level and her hands steady, and she felt the shift in the air immediately, the particular attention of a room that has been talking about you and is now recalibrating in real time. Fabian Mercer was across the room. He saw her the same moment she saw him, and his face did something fast and well-controlled, surprise reassessment, and then the smooth, practiced recovery of a man who is very good at adjusting to changed circumstances. He crossed to her before she had spoken to anyone else. "Miss Hart," he said warmly. "I'm delighted. I didn't expect—" "Mr. Mercer." She smiled with exactly the warmth she wished to convey, which was minimal. "Commissioner Hale was kind enough to extend an invitation." "Of course." His eyes moved briefly past her to where Ethan stood just inside the door speaking to the commissioner. "And Caldwell came himself. That's unexpected." "He has business with Commissioner Hale," she said pleasantly. "Naturally." He lowered his voice. "Miss Hart, I hope things at the estate are comfortable, after the last few weeks." She looked at him. "The last few weeks have been very productive," she said. "The north wall is nearly finished. We found 11 volumes that had been misplaced back in their proper places now." She tilted her head. "I find that enormously satisfying, returning things to where they belong." His smile stayed in place. "How admirable. Isn't it?" She turned slightly as Commissioner Hale approached. "Commissioner, what a lovely evening." The dinner itself was unremarkable. Evelyn spoke with Commissioner Hale for 20 minutes about his collection, a genuine conversation detailed and specific, the kind she was good at, and felt his interest shift from the social to the professional in real time. He had 3 volumes he suspected were colonial-era originals rather than later reprints. She told him how to identify the difference and watched him write down what she said. Mercer, 3 seats down, watched all of this. Ethan across the table said almost nothing, but she was aware of him with a precision that had nothing to do with observation and everything to do with the 6 weeks of learning exactly where he was in any room without needing to look. It was after dinner in the parlor that everything shifted. Mercer found her alone near the window. Alone by design. She understood afterward, because he had waited for her to step away from Mrs. Aldridge before he moved. "You're very good at this," he said, coming up beside her. "At conversation. At performing competence." His voice had changed, still pleasant, but the pleasantness had thinned like paint that has been stretched too far. "You've impressed Hale. You've positioned yourself as indispensable to Caldwell. You're very good at making men believe they need you." She looked at him steadily. "Is that what you see? I see a woman who appeared in this county with impeccable timing and has spent 6 weeks making herself into something difficult to remove." He smiled. "I find that interesting." "I find it interesting," she said quietly, "that a man who sent an anonymous letter to a grieving widower full of fabricated allegations has the confidence to stand in front of me and discuss the ethics of other people's positioning." The smile went rigid. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "Yes." She held his gaze. "It is." "You can't prove." "Mr. Caldwell can." She watched that land. The paper stock, the ink, the timing. "Gerald Holt is thorough." She kept her voice even, almost conversational. "You miscalculated Mr. Mercer. You thought he would act on the letter before he thought to examine it." "And instead," Mercer said softly, "he examined it." Something moved behind his eyes. "Because of you. Because he's a more careful man than you gave him credit for." Mercer was quiet for a moment. Then, "You realize what he is, don't you? He's a broken man, Miss Hart. He's been broken since well before his fiancée left him. Whatever you think is happening between you—" "Stop," she said. He stopped. "You don't get to talk about him," she said, and her voice was still level, but it had something in it now, something quiet and absolute, like a door being closed and locked from the inside. "Not to me, not in that way. Whatever you came to this county to accomplish, whatever you thought you'd find at Caldwell Estate, it is finished. I am telling you clearly, and I will not say it again." Mercer looked at her for a long moment. And then something remarkable happened. He stepped back. Not the retreat of a man who has surrendered, the withdrawal of a man who is recalculating, who has looked at the opposition and decided the terrain has changed and the approach needs to change with it. "You're going to be difficult," he said quietly, and it was not quite an insult. It was almost an assessment. "I've been told that before," she said. "It hasn't slowed me down yet." He left her at the window. She stood there for a moment and let the steadiness in her chest settle back into something resembling calm. Then she felt him beside her before she saw him. Ethan. Standing 2 feet away, looking not at her, but out across the parlor where Mercer was now speaking with a group near the door, his posture perfectly composed, giving nothing away. "How long were you there?" she asked quietly. "Long enough," he said. A pause. "You told him it was finished," Ethan said. "Yes." "Is it?" She looked at him. "Men like Mercer don't finish things because you ask them to. They finish things when the cost exceeds the return." She paused. "We've just made the cost visible. Whether that's enough depends on what he wants badly enough to keep paying for." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What does he want?" he said. She thought about Mercer's face when he had first seen her at Caldwell Estate, the way his eyes had gone from her to Ethan and back again with the quick calculating interest of a man who had found something he had not expected. "I think," she said slowly, "that he came here for the land, the Whitfield dispute. And I think he found something else when he got here, and I think that something else made him angry in a way that had nothing to do with land." Ethan looked at her. "What's something else?" She met his eyes. "The possibility," she said quietly, "that you might be all right." The silence that followed was different from any silence she had heard from him before. Not the careful silence of a man withholding. Not the controlled silence of a man deciding what to say. Just silence. The silence of a man who has been handed something true and does not yet know what to do with it. "Miss Hart," he said finally. "Yes." He turned from the window and looked at her fully, and she saw it again, the fracture wider than it had ever been, the light coming through in full, now undeniable. "I want you to know," he said, "that whatever happens next with Mercer, with the county, with any of it, I will not go cold before I ask you. I gave you my word." His voice was very quiet. "I intend to keep it." She held his gaze and felt something shift in her own chest, slow, significant, the way large things shift, the way a season changes. Not all at once, just the first unmistakable sign that what was cold is preparing to become something else. "I know you do," she said. And for the first time since she had arrived at Caldwell Estate, she believed it without reservation. Outside, the August evening was settling into dark, and the road back to the estate lay ahead of them, and Fabian Mercer was still in the room behind them. But standing at the window with Ethan Caldwell beside her for the first time in 6 weeks, Evelyn Hart was not watching the door. She was watching the road forward, and it was the road forward that frightened her most of all. The ride back from the Hale dinner was quiet. Not the uncomfortable quiet of two people who have nothing to say, but the specific quiet of two people who have said enough for one evening and are still absorbing it. Evelyn sat in the Caldwell carriage with Mrs. Aldridge dozing lightly across from her, and outside she could hear Ethan's horse keeping pace alongside, steady, unhurried, the rhythm of a man who had nowhere else to be. She looked at her hands in her lap and thought about what she had said at the window. The possibility that you might be all right. She had not planned to say it. It had come out the way true things sometimes did not, because she had decided to say them, but because the moment had required them, and she was not a woman who withheld what a moment required. She was less certain in the dark of the carriage that it had been wise. Mrs. Aldridge stirred and opened one eye. "You did well tonight," she said without preamble. "I made an enemy," Evelyn said. "You already had one. Tonight you just made him aware that you knew it." She closed her eye again. "That's not the same thing as making one." Evelyn looked out into the dark. She did not sleep that night either. But this time, it was not dread that kept her awake. It was something else, warmer, less comfortable in a different way, the kind of feeling that sits in the chest and will not be categorized. She laid the library fire herself again in the morning, because it had become, without her intending it, her thing to do. Ethan was different in the days after the dinner, not dramatically different. He was not a man given to dramatic shifts, but the walls were lower. She could see it in the way he came to the library, more often stayed longer, stopped positioning himself across the room as default. He brought his own work, sometimes correspondence account ledgers, and sat at the far end of the reading table, while she catalogued each of them doing their own work in the same room, and neither of them finding that strange. On a Wednesday afternoon, in the second week after the dinner, he set down his pen and said without looking up, "My sister is coming." Evelyn looked up from the catalogue. "Margaret." He glanced at her, a brief, sharp look of surprise. "You know about Margaret?" "Mrs. Aldridge mentioned her. She said your sister writes every month." "She does." He picked up the pen again, set it back down. "She is persistent." "How long since you've seen her?" 2 years. He said it the way he said things he had decided to say plainly rather than dress up. "She stopped visiting after the year I wasn't present for things. She said she would come back when I was ready to have her." A pause. "Apparently she has decided I'm ready." "Are you—" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, but I told Gerald to prepare the guest room." She looked at him. He was looking at the ledger. "That sounds like ready to me," she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but the shape that precedes one. The first time she had seen that from him. "Don't tell her that," he said. "She'll be insufferable about it." Margaret Caldwell arrived on a Friday in a hired carriage with 3 trunks, a hatbox, and the energy of a woman who had been waiting for an invitation for 2 years and was not going to waste a single moment of it. She was perhaps 30, with her brother's dark eyes and none of his restraint. She embraced Mrs. Aldridge in the front drive, asked after the cook by name, and turned to Ethan with the directness of a woman who loves her brother too much to pretend she hasn't been worried about him. "You look better," she said. "You look the same," he said. "That's a compliment." She kissed his cheek, something Evelyn suspected he did not receive often, and turned. She saw Evelyn standing to the side, and her expression sharpened with a quick, bright interest. "You must be Miss Hart," she said. "Gerald mentioned you in his letter." "Gerald wrote to you," Ethan said. "Gerald has been writing to me for 9 years. Did you think I only had one source?" She crossed to Evelyn and took both her hands before Evelyn quite knew what was happening. "He says you've done extraordinary work with the library, and that you found Father's books." "We found them together," Evelyn said. Margaret glanced at her brother, back at Evelyn. Something in her expression settled into a warmth that had been present from the beginning, but was now pointed deliberate. "Come inside," she said. "I want to hear everything." Margaret was a disruption to the household in the best possible sense. She talked at breakfast, which was something no one had done at Caldwell Hall for 3 years. She asked Ethan questions he had to actually answer. She came to the library on her second morning and spent an hour with Evelyn, not asking about the catalog, but asking about the books themselves. Which ones were surprising, which ones were strange, what she had found that nobody would have expected. It was the most conversation Evelyn had had in 2 months. "He talks about the library," Margaret said on the second afternoon when Ethan had gone to the East Fields and they were alone in the sitting room. Evelyn looked up from her tea. "I'm sorry." "In his letters. He doesn't say much, you know how he is, but he mentions the library. And you." She looked at her with frank, warm curiosity. "More than he mentions anything else." Evelyn set down her cup carefully. "We work together every day. It would be strange if he didn't." "Ethan doesn't mention things unless they matter to him," Margaret said. "He didn't mention the accounts manager once in 4 years of letters. He didn't mention Gerald until the 3rd year." She tilted her head. "He mentioned you in the second letter after you arrived." Evelyn was quiet. "Miss Caldwell." "Margaret." "Margaret." She chose her words. "Your brother and I have a professional arrangement that I value enormously. I don't think it would be wise to—" "He hasn't laughed in 3 years," Margaret said simply. "He hasn't, not even clothes. And Gerald says that last week at dinner you said something about the French natural history catalog and he laughed." She paused. "Actually laughed." Evelyn stared at her. "I wasn't aware of that," she said. "I know you weren't. That's the part that matters." Margaret picked up her cup. "I'm not trying to put you in an uncomfortable position, Miss Hart. I'm telling you what I see because I think you deserve to know it." She looked out the window. "He's been carrying a great deal of weight for a very long time, and something has shifted since you came. That's all I'm saying." Evelyn sat with that for a long moment. "He's a complicated man," she said finally. "The best ones always are," Margaret said, and smiled. It was Gerald who told Ethan about the second letter. Ethan was in the study mid-morning, going through the week's accounts, when Gerald appeared in the doorway, with the particular expression that meant he was carrying something he had been debating whether to bring. "There's been a development," Gerald said, "with Mercer." Ethan set down the pen. "Tell me." "He's been to see Commissioner Hale. This morning early before I knew about it. He brought documentation." Gerald crossed to the desk and set down a folded paper. "Hale sent this over an hour ago. He wanted you to see it before he responded." Ethan unfolded it. He read it once. Then he read it again slower and felt something in his chest go cold, in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was a letter not anonymous this time, signed with Mercer's name and a commissioner's seal presenting what appeared to be a formal account of financial misconduct. Specifically allegations that Evelyn Hart had been accessing the Caldwell Estate's land deed archive under the pretense of cataloging and had been relaying information to a third party named as one Robert Whitfield of the Whitfield land dispute. It included dates. Specific dates. Dates on which Evelyn had been, according to Mercer's documentation, seen entering and leaving a building in Ashford Town where a Whitfield representative maintained an office. Ethan stared at the dates. "These dates," he said. "Yes, sir." Gerald's voice was careful. "I noticed the same thing. 2 of these dates she was here. I was with her. We were in the storage room finding my father's books." "Yes, sir." "And this one?" He put his finger on the 3rd date. "This was the day of the Hale dinner. She was in the carriage from 4 o'clock until we returned at 10. "Yes, sir." Ethan set the letter down. He stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to Gerald and his hands very still at his sides, and he stayed that way for almost a full minute. Gerald waited. He had learned in 9 years that this was what you did. "He's escalating," Ethan said finally. "He knows the first letter didn't hold, so he's making it official, putting his name on it, forcing Hale to act. If Hale acts on this formally, it becomes public record," Gerald said, "regardless of whether the allegations are proven." "I know that. And Miss Hart's reputation." "I know that, Gerald." His voice was controlled, but it had an edge that Gerald recognized, not anger at Gerald, anger at a situation that was moving faster than he could manage it. He turned from the window. "Write to Hale. Tell him I request 48 hours before any formal action is taken. Tell him I have evidence that contradicts the dates in this document." "Yes, sir. And Mercer?" Ethan looked at him. "Leave Mercer to me." He did not tell Evelyn about the letter immediately. That decision made in the 30 seconds between leaving the study and reaching the East Corridor was deliberate. Not because he was going cold, not because he was going behind the walls. He told himself it was tactical. He needed to verify. He needed 48 hours, and he needed her to be able to work in the library without carrying the weight of what was coming. He told himself that. He almost believed it. He came to the library at the usual afternoon time and sat at the table and opened the ledger he had brought with him and tried to work. She was at the north shelves, talking quietly to herself, the way she did when she was cataloging Boston Imprint. 1802 geography text condition, fair spine intact. And the sound of it, the ordinary rhythm of it, was the thing that undid him. Because he knew what was in that letter. And he knew what would happen when it became public. And he sat at the table and watched her work, and felt with a clarity that was almost physical that he had been here before. Not here specifically, not in this room, not with this woman, but here in the larger sense. Standing on the edge of something real, watching it get dismantled from the outside before he had the courage to claim it from the inside. "You're not working," she said without turning. He looked at the ledger. "I am. You haven't turned a page in 20 minutes. She came down from the step stool and looked at him. "What's happened?" He looked at her across the table, and then he did the thing he had promised her he would do. "Sit down," he said. "I need to tell you something." Sure. She read the letter without speaking. She read it the way she read everything, carefully, thoroughly, without rushing. He watched her face while she read, and it did not change much, but he had learned to read the small things, the slight tightening at the corner of her eye, when she reached the dates, the way her jaw set when she turned to the second page. She finished and set the letter on the table. "These dates are wrong," she said. "I know. You can prove that. I can. Gerald is documenting it now." He paused. "But Evelyn—" It was the first time he had used her name. They both heard it. She looked up. He held her gaze. "Even when the dates are disproven, even when Mercer's documentation falls apart, the letter will have existed. The inquiry will have been opened. People will know it happened, and a portion of them will remember the allegation long after the proof has been established." "I know that," she said quietly. "That means I know what it means." She looked at the letter again. It means my name in this county is going to carry this for a long time, maybe permanently. She pressed her lips together. It means positions like this one are going to be harder to come by. She paused. It means he's found a way to make this costly, regardless of the outcome. Yes. She was quiet. He waited. Are you asking me, she said carefully, whether I want to leave? Before the inquiry begins, so that it looks like a mutual parting rather than— No, he said. She looked at him. I am not asking you to leave, he said. I am telling you what is coming so that you can decide what you want to do with that information. You told me you wanted to be asked first. This is me asking. He held her gaze. Whatever you decide, I will support it. If you want to stay, I will fight this with everything I have. If you want to go, I will write you the strongest letter of recommendation this county has ever produced and make sure every serious collector from Boston to Philadelphia knows your name. The silence that followed was long and full. Why? She said finally, and her voice was quieter than usual. Why what? Why would you fight for me? You've spent 3 years making this estate into something that doesn't require you to fight for anyone. He was quiet for a moment. Because you laid the fire, he said. She stared at him. Every morning since the 2nd week, he said. When I stopped having it laid, you laid it yourself. Without being asked, without commenting on it, without making it mean anything out loud. He looked at her. Nobody has done something like that for me in a very long time, without wanting something in return. You just did it because it needed doing. He paused. That's that matters to me. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. I'm staying, she said. Evelyn, I'm staying, she said again, and her voice was clear and certain, the voice she used when she had made a decision and would not be moved from it. Fabian Mercer is not going to drive me out of this library, and he is not going to be the reason you spend another 3 years behind those walls. She stood up. Now, tell me everything Gerald has found, and let's figure out what we're going to do about this. Sound. What Gerald had found was more than enough. It took Ethan and Gerald 3 hours at the study table, with Evelyn sitting across from them, and asking the precise questions that moved the process forward. What was the source of the paper stock? Who supplied it in this county? Who would have had access to the commissioner's seal to duplicate it? And by the end of those 3 hours, the shape of what Mercer had done was visible. He had not worked alone. The paper stock matched a supply order placed by the Whitfield family's legal representative, the same representative whose office Mercer had claimed Evelyn had visited. The seal on the formal letter was not a commissioner's seal. It was a close reproduction done by someone with access to a printing press, and enough skill to make it convincing to a casual eye, but not to a careful one. Gerald had been careful. He made mistakes, Evelyn said, looking at Gerald's notes. He was moving too fast. The first letter didn't work, so he escalated before he had time to be thorough. Overconfidence, Gerald said. Yes. She looked at Ethan. He didn't think you'd look this closely. He thought the allegation alone would be enough to make you act before you examined it. Ethan's jaw was tight. He thought I'd repeat what I did with the first letter. Yes, she said simply. He bet on your history. The silence that followed was sharp. He was almost right, Ethan said. But he wasn't, she said. Because you came to me first this time. He looked at her across the desk. Take this to Hale, she said, nodding at Gerald's documentation. All of it, tonight if you can. Don't give Mercer another 12 hours to adjust his position. Hale won't be available tonight. Then first thing tomorrow, she said. Before Mercer knows we have this. She paused. Gerald, is there anything that ties the Whitfield representative directly to the seal reproduction? Gerald looked at his notes. There's a printer in Ashford who did work for that office 6 weeks ago. He might remember the specifics of the order. Then we need to speak to him tonight, she said. Both men looked at her. I'm not suggesting I go, she said dryly. I'm suggesting Gerald does. Tonight. Before the printer has a conversation with anyone else. She looked at Ethan. Can Gerald go tonight? Gerald. Ethan said. Can you go tonight? I've already got my coat, Gerald said, and left. Margaret found them in the study at 9 in the evening, still working with the remains of a cold supper on the side table that Mrs. Aldridge had brought, and neither of them had eaten properly. She stood in the doorway and looked at the two of them. Ethan at the desk. Evelyn across from him. Papers between them, the lamp burning low, and said nothing for a moment. Then, Gerald just rode out at a gallop. Should I be concerned? No, Ethan said. Are you going to tell me what's happening? Tomorrow. Margaret looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked back at her steadily. Margaret nodded once, the nod of a woman who has assessed a situation and is choosing to trust it, and left. They worked until the lamp needed refilling, and then Ethan refilled it without being asked, and they kept working. And at some point after 10 o'clock, he looked up from a document and found her with her chin resting in her hand, and her eyes still sharp, still focused, still fully present, and felt something move in his chest that was large and quiet and had no good name. You should sleep, he said. So should you. I'm used to not sleeping. So am I, she said, and looked at him with an expression that was tired and honest and close enough to something he recognized as his own reflection that it made him look away. Evelyn, he said quietly. She looked at him. He had things he wanted to say. He was aware of them, had been aware of them for weeks, stacked up behind the walls where things went when they had no safe place to land. But she was in the middle of a fight he had pulled her into, and the documentation was half done, and Gerald was riding across the county in the dark, and it was not the right time. Thank you, he said, for tonight. She held his gaze for a moment. Don't thank me yet, she said quietly. Wait until it's over. He nodded. She gathered the papers she needed and stood and paused at the door. Ethan, she said. He looked up. She had used his name twice now. He had noticed both times. Whatever he was betting on, your history, your patterns, the things that have broken you before. She held his eyes. He lost that bet tonight. I want you to remember that tomorrow when you're in front of Hale. She left. He sat at the desk in the lamplight for a long time after she was gone, and he thought about what it meant that a woman he had known for 2 months had walked into his study and fought for the truth of his character with the same calm, thorough precision she brought to cataloging a library. He thought about what it meant that he had let her. And for the first time in 3 years, Ethan Caldwell sat in the quiet of his own house and did not feel alone in it. That, more than anything else that had happened, was the thing that frightened him, and the thing that he was in the very deepest and most reluctant part of himself most grateful for. Gerald came back at midnight. Ethan heard the horse in the drive and was already at the study door by the time Gerald came through the front entrance, coat still on boots, carrying the mud of a hard ride and the expression of a man who has found exactly what he went looking for. The printer remembers the order, Gerald said without preamble. 6 weeks ago. A man came in with a design commissioner's seal, near enough to pass a quick look. Paid in cash. The printer thought it was for a theatrical production. He set a folded paper on the desk. He wrote it all down for me. Date, description of the man, the specific modifications requested to make it look official without being an exact copy. Ethan picked up the paper. Description matches Mercer's associate, Gerald said. The one who traveled with him from Boston. Young man, fair hair, rode a gray horse. Hale needs to see this tonight. I've already sent a rider to his house, sir. He's expecting you at 7 in the morning. Ethan set the paper down, looked at Gerald for a moment, the long, steady look of a man who wants to say something and doesn't have the right words for it. Good work, he said finally. Gerald nodded once. Will there be anything else tonight, sir? No, get some sleep. Gerald left. Ethan stood in the study alone and looked at the printer's statement on the desk and felt the specific quality of a thing that has been falling, finally hitting the floor. Not over, not yet, but the direction was clear now. The ground was solid under his feet in a way it had not been for 3 weeks. He went to bed at 1 in the morning. He slept for 6 hours straight, which was more than he had managed in a single stretch since the first anonymous letter arrived. Hale received him at 7, with coffee, and the careful attention of a man who understood that what he was about to hear was going to require him to make a decision he would not enjoy making. Ethan laid everything on the table. Gerald's documentation, the printer's statement, the dates that contradicted Mercer's allegations, the paper stock that traced back to the Whitfield representative's office, the seal reproduction, and the specific instructions given to the printer. He laid it all out in the order that made the most logical sense, without embellishment, without emotion, in the clear, precise manner of a man who has spent 9 years managing a complex estate and knows how to present a case. Hale read everything twice. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at Ethan over the rim of his coffee cup. "This is damning," he said. "Yes. Mercer has been a guest in this house. I'm aware. And the Whitfield connection. If this printer's statement holds, Mercer has been working directly with the party in the land dispute, which means his interest in the Caldwell estate wasn't social." Hale set down the cup. "He was looking for leverage, something in your archive that would benefit the Whitfield's claim." "That's my conclusion as well." "And Miss Hart was the pretext," Ethan said flatly. "He needed a reason to access the estate. When he couldn't get one through her, he tried to remove her and create enough chaos that the estate's records would become accessible through a formal inquiry." Hale was quiet for a moment. Then, "I owe Miss Hart an apology." "She would prefer," Ethan said, "that you make it public." Hale looked at him. "The gossip Mercer spread through this county was deliberate," Ethan said. "He used social channels to damage her reputation before any formal allegation existed. A private apology to Miss Hart does nothing to undo what is already in circulation." He held Hale's gaze. "A public statement from your office confirming that the allegations were fabricated and that Miss Hart's conduct has been beyond reproach, that does something." Hale studied him for a long moment. "You've thought about this carefully," he said. "I have. This matters to you." Ethan kept his expression neutral. "It is the right thing to do." Hale picked up his pen. "I'll have the statement drafted this afternoon." He did not go directly back to the estate. He rode to the edge of the eastern fields, first the way he did when he needed to think and let the horse find its own pace while his mind settled around what had just happened. The case was made. Hale would act. Mercer's scheme was finished. That part was clear. What was less clear, what had been less clear for weeks building quietly in the background of everything else that was happening, was the part that had nothing to do with Mercer. The part that had to do with a woman who laid a fire she hadn't been asked to lay, who sat across a desk at 10 o'clock at night and fought for the truth of his character with the same calm precision she brought to everything who had looked at him on 2 separate occasions, and said things so accurate that they had felt like a hand pressed flat against a wound. He had been here before, or thought he had. Thought he knew what it felt like to want to trust someone and have that trust used against him. Thought he had learned at sufficient cost what happened when you let someone matter. But he had not been here before, because he had never before, Evelyn Hart, met someone whose honesty asked nothing of him in return. His fiancée had been charming, and he had loved her for it, but the charm had always been a thing being deployed, a tool pointed at something. He understood that now in the clear light of distance. The warmth had had a direction. Evelyn's didn't. She said true things because they were true. She laid the fire because it needed laying. She sat in his study at 10 o'clock at night and argued for his documentation, not because she wanted something from him, but because it was right, and she was not a woman who sat still in the presence of a wrong that could be corrected. He turned the horse back toward the estate. He knew what he needed to do. He had known for several days. He had been waiting the way he waited for everything for the moment when he was certain. When the ground was solid. When the risk had been fully assessed and the decision was clean. But the ground was never going to be completely solid. He understood that now. Evelyn had told him in a dozen different ways across 2 months of conversations he had been cataloging as carefully as she cataloged the library that trust was not a conclusion you reached after sufficient evidence. It was a decision you made before the evidence was complete. He rode back. She was in the library. Of course she was in the library. It was 9:30 in the morning, and she had work to do, and she was doing it because she was Evelyn Hart, and she did not stop working because the world was complicated. She looked up when he came in, and he could see in her face that she had been waiting, not anxiously, not performing calm, but genuinely waiting. The way you wait for information you need before you can make your next decision. "Well," she said. "Hale is issuing a public statement this afternoon," he said, "confirming the allegations were fabricated. Your name will be cleared formally in writing, distributed to the same channels Mercer used to spread the gossip." She let out a slow breath. "And Mercer, Hale is writing to the county board." Given the connection to the Whitfield dispute, it becomes a legal matter, not just a social one. Mercer's involvement with the Whitfields, while presenting himself as an independent party to Commissioner Hale, is a separate problem from what he did to you. He paused. He overreached. He wasn't just trying to damage your reputation. He was trying to use this estate to influence an active land dispute. That's a significantly more serious thing. "It was always about the land," she said. "Yes. And we were in the way." "You were," he said. "I was the door he was trying to open. You were the reason the door didn't open." She looked at him steadily. "I wasn't trying to protect your estate, Ethan. I was protecting the truth of the situation." "I know." He crossed the room, not to the window, not to the table. Directly to her, which was different, which was something he had not done before. He stopped 3 feet away and looked at her with the full, unguarded attention that he usually kept carefully rationed. "I know that. And I want you to hear me say it clearly what you did these past 2 months, and specifically these past 3 weeks. The way you handled yourself, the way you helped, the way you stayed when you had every reason to go." He stopped, made himself continue. "I am not going to stand here and make it into something small by thanking you for it. It was not small." She was very still. "It wasn't small for me either," she said quietly. The room was completely quiet. He looked at her and felt with a clarity that was startling in its simplicity that he was done being afraid of this. 3 years of careful management of his own interior. 3 years of walls and distance and the deliberate maintenance of a life that required nothing of him emotionally. 3 years of survival that had slowly, without his noticing, become a habit too comfortable to examine. And then a woman with a worn leather satchel had walked into his library and started laying fires, and the habit had cracked down the middle, and here he was. "I have something to ask you," he said. "All right. And I want you to know before I ask it that whatever you answer, the position is yours for as long as you want it. The catalog is not finished. The work is real. I'm not—" He stopped. Tried again. "I'm not using the question as leverage. I want that to be clear." She waited. "I would like to call on you," he said. "Formally, in the appropriate manner." He met her eyes. "I would like to take whatever this is and give it the space to be what it might be, if that is something you are willing to consider." The silence lasted 4 full seconds. He counted them. "You're asking to court me," she said. "Yes. While I'm employed in your household. I'm aware of the complication. Margaret will be very smug about this." Something moved in his chest, warm, unexpected, almost like a laugh. "She'll be insufferable. I've already accepted that." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. That steady, careful look he had learned was not doubt, but assessment. The look of a woman who takes in the full picture before she speaks. "Ethan," she said, "I came here with 1 trunk and a cataloging system and no intention of anything except doing the work I was hired to do." "I know. And somewhere between the locked case and the 11 missing books and 3 weeks of Fabian Mercer, I have—" She stopped. For the first time since he had known her, she stopped not because she was choosing words, but because the words were larger than she had expected them to be. "I have found it considerably more difficult to maintain a professional distance than I anticipated." He looked at her. "Is that a yes?" he said. She held his gaze. That, she said, is a yes. Margaret found out at dinner. She did not find out because anyone told her. She found out because she walked into the sitting room before dinner and found her brother standing at the fireplace and Evelyn standing 3 feet away, and the quality of the silence between them was a thing she had spent 30 years learning to read. She looked at Ethan. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who is braced for the inevitable. Finally, Margaret said with the profound satisfaction of someone whose patience has been extensively tested and has now been rewarded. She turned to Evelyn. I want you to know I had nothing to do with any of this. He arrived at this entirely on his own. I am simply deeply relieved. Margaret, Ethan said, I'm allowed to be relieved. I've been writing letters to an empty house for 2 years. She sat down and picked up her embroidery with the air of a woman settling in for something well-deserved. Sit down, both of you. Mrs. Aldridge made something extraordinary for supper, and I intend to enjoy every moment of this evening. Ethan looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at him. Something passed between them. Small private, the beginning of a language that belongs only to 2 people who have survived the same hard weather and come out the other side. He sat down. She sat across from him. And for the first time in 3 years, Ethan Caldwell sat at his own dinner table and was present for every moment of it. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing real ever is. Hale's public statement ran in the county circular and was read at the next commissioners' meeting, and the effect on Evelyn's reputation was not instant reputations. Once disturbed, settle slowly like sediment after a stone has been thrown, but it was steady. Serious people read the statement and adjusted their understanding. The ones who didn't were not Evelyn, decided people whose opinions required her attention. Mercer left the county before the board's inquiry was formally opened. He did not leave quietly. A man like Mercer did not know how to leave quietly, but he left completely, which was what mattered. The Whitfield dispute lost its most effective advocate and ground to an unproductive halt. Gerald, with quiet efficiency, ensured that the documentation of Mercer's involvement was preserved and properly filed. Commissioner Hale came to the estate in person to deliver his apology to Evelyn. He shook her hand and said, "You are precisely the kind of woman this county needs more of, Miss Hart." And she thanked him with the composure she brought to everything, and went back to the library and sat at the reading table for a full 5 minutes, without picking up her pen. Mrs. Aldridge brought her tea without being asked. She did not comment. But her face, as she set down the cup, had the expression of a woman who has watched something complicated resolve itself the right way, and is taking a private, sustained pleasure in it. The catalogue was finished on a Thursday in late October, with the first cold front of the season pressing against the library windows and the fire burning high. Evelyn set the final entry, Volume 14, 237, Virginia imprint, 1819, Correspondence Personal, Caldwell Family Archive, and closed the ledger. She sat back and looked at the shelves. 14,237 volumes. Indexed, cross-referenced, documented. Every volume returned to a place where it could be found, every gap filled, every missing thing accounted for. The library was whole. She sat with that for a moment. Then she heard him in the doorway. She did not need to look. She knew the sound of him, the way you know the sound of a house you have lived in long enough, the specific weight of his step, the particular quality of his silence. "It's done," she said. He came in and stood at the reading table and looked at the closed ledger. Then he looked at the shelves. 14,000 volumes, he said. 14,237. She stood. "Your father had good taste to the very end. The last acquisition is from 1811, the year he died, a collection of Virginia family correspondence. He must have ordered it months earlier." Ethan reached out and put his hand on the spine of the nearest volume, not opening it, just touching it, the same way he had touched his father's marginalia in the storage room all those weeks ago. "What happens now?" he said. "To you." She looked at him. What do you mean? The catalog is finished. The work is done. He turned. You came here for a position. The position is complete. She studied him carefully. Are you asking if I'm leaving? I'm asking what you want, he said. Not what I want, not what makes sense for the estate. What you want. She was quiet for a moment. I want to start on the archive, she said. The family correspondence in the East Storage. It hasn't been properly organized in 40 years. There's a complete record of this estate's history in those boxes, and nobody has ever made it accessible. She paused. That could take another year, maybe 2. He held her gaze. And after that, he said. She held his gaze right back. Ask me again in 2 years, she said, and we'll see where we are. He was quiet for a moment. Then he did something she had seen building for weeks, slowly, incrementally, the way a season builds and still did not entirely expect. He reached across the reading table and took her hand, not dramatically, not with ceremony, just took it the way you take the hand of someone you have decided to stop being afraid of, and held it in both of his, and looked at her. I don't want to ask you in 2 years, he said quietly. I want to ask you now. Her heart did something considerable. Ethan, I spent 3 years becoming a man who didn't need anyone, he said. I was thorough about it. I removed every possible point of entry, and I managed everything alone, and I told myself that was strength. His hands were steady around hers. It wasn't strength. It was fear, with better posture. He looked at her. You came into this house, and you laid fires, and you found missing books, and you sat across from me at 10 o'clock at night, and fought for the truth, and you never once asked me to be anything other than what I was. And he stopped. I would like to spend the rest of my life attempting to deserve that. The library was very quiet. Outside, the October wind pressed against the windows, and the fire burned, and 14,237 volumes stood in their proper places on the shelves. Ordered whole accounted for every one of them exactly where it belonged. That, Evelyn said softly, is the most words I have ever heard you say at one time. Don't get used to it, he said. It took me 3 years to work up to it. She laughed a real laugh, unguarded, the kind she did not produce for anyone who had not earned it. He watched her laugh and felt the last of the walls come down. Not dramatically, not all at once, just down. Yes, she said, when the laugh had settled. Whatever you're asking, the answer is yes. I haven't asked yet. I know. She looked at him. Ask anyway. He looked at her across the reading table in the library his father had built, and she had restored with the fire she had been laying every morning for 3 months burning at their backs, and he asked. And she said yes, and Ethan Caldwell, who had spent 3 years turning himself into a man, who did not need anyone discovered in that moment what he should have understood from the beginning, that the bravest thing a broken man can do is not to seal himself shut against the world, but to find the one person worth opening for and choose them. Clearly, completely, without reservation. That was not the end of their difficulties. Real love never arrives without its cost, and the road from a cataloger's position to a permanent place in Caldwell Hall was not without its obstacles, its negotiations, its moments of doubt that had to be spoken out loud and worked through together, rather than swallowed alone. But they worked through them together. That was the difference. That was the whole of it. And every morning without fail, when the library fire needed laying, they laid it together. That was how Ethan Caldwell learned at the age of 34 that trust is not a door you open once and walk through. It is a fire you choose to light every single day, and the right person lights it beside you without being asked for the rest of your life.